In the world of professional sports, we love the story of the natural, the kid who found a ball in the streets, the athlete born with a gift that no one could have predicted. But what if I told you that one of the greatest icons in NBA history wasn't an accident of nature? What if I told you he was a project, a literal experiment engineered by a superpower to conquer the West? Yao Ming stands 7 feet 6 inches tall. To the world, he was the Great Wall of Houston, a global ambassador who bridged the gap between two clashing superpowers. But behind the $2 billion in revenue he generated for the NBA and behind the Hall of Fame career lies a much darker narrative, a story that begins not on a basketball court but in a government office decades before he was even born. To understand Yao, you have to understand the state plan. In 1980s China, sports weren't a hobby, they were a weapon of national prestige. And Yao was the ultimate weapon. He was the product of a state-sanctioned union between the two tallest athletes in the country, a marriage encouraged by officials who were obsessed with genetic potential. From the moment he was born, weighing twice as much as a normal infant, his life was no longer his own. He was measured, tracked, and molded. He didn't choose basketball. Basketball was chosen for him. He was forced into a system of grueling 10-hour-a-day training sessions. He was treated like a state asset, a biological bridge to the Western world. And when he finally reached the NBA, he didn't just carry the hopes of a city, he carried the weight of 1.4 billion people on his shoulders. A weight so heavy it would eventually crush the very body the state had worked so hard to build. Today, we peel back the curtain on the most complex experiment in sports history. This is the story of a man who was built to be a god, but who only ever wanted to be himself. This is the forced destiny of Yao Ming. To understand the creation of Yao Ming, we have to look at his parents. In most stories, this is where we talk about a chance meeting or a high school romance. But in the Chinese sports system of the 1970s, romance was secondary to biology. Yao's father, Yao Jiwan, stood 6 feet 10 inches. His mother, Fang Fengdi, was 6 feet 2 inches. At the time, they were the two tallest people in China. Fang Fengdi wasn't just tall, she was a fierce captain of the Chinese national team and a dedicated member of the Red Guard. The Shanghai sports officials saw more than just two basketball players. They saw a genetic goldmine. For years, officials encouraged the two to spend time together, effectively matching them to ensure that their combined genes would stay within the city's athletic system. It was a marriage sanctioned by the state, for the benefit of the state. When Yao was born in 1980, he weighed 11 pounds, nearly double the average. The experiment was working. By age 8, he was already 5 feet 7 inches. For the Chinese government, this wasn't just a healthy child, it was a high-value asset. While other kids were dreaming of different futures, Yao was subjected to a battery of growth prediction tests. Doctors measured his bone density and his wingspan, predicting he would eventually reach 7 feet 3 inches. They were off by 3 inches. Here is the part most people don't know. Yao Ming hated basketball. He found the noise of the ball on the hardwood irritating. He had the soul of an academic. He wanted to be an archaeologist, to dig into the past rather than jump for the future. But in a centralized sports economy, your desires are irrelevant. At age 9, he was sent to a specialized sports boarding school. The regime was brutal, 6 days a week, 10 hours a day. If he didn't want to play for himself, he was told he had to play for his parents' honor and for China's face. This wasn't practice. It was industrial manufacturing. He was taught to be a mechanical finisher. Thousands of hooks, thousands of free throws, over and over until his movements were robotic. The system didn't care if he was happy, it cared if he was efficient. By the time he was 17, Yao was a 7'5" teenage giant with the footwork of a ballerina and the eyes of a man who had already seen too much. He was finally ready to be unveiled to the world. But as the Chinese Basketball Association was about to find out, their experiment was becoming too big for even them to contain. By 2001, the experiment had outgrown the laboratory. Yao Ming wasn't just the best player in China, he was a god among men. In his final season with the Shanghai Sharks, he averaged 39 points and 20 rebounds per game. In one finals game, he went 21 for 21 from the field. Perfect. He had nothing left to prove in Asia. The NBA was calling, and the Houston Rockets held the #1 pick. But there was a problem. The Chinese government wasn't ready to let their prize asset go. To the Chinese Basketball Association, CBA, Yao wasn't just a player, he was state property. They watched with a mix of pride and paranoia as American scouts circled. They had already seen another star, Wang Jiji, defect to the NBA and refuse to return for national duties. They weren't going to let that happen again. The negotiations felt less like a sports trade and more like a high-stakes hostage negotiation. The price of freedom was staggering. The Chinese government demanded a massive release fee and implemented a new regulation specifically for Yao. He would have to remit up to 50% of his NBA earnings back to the state. His salary, his endorsements, his future. The government wanted their cut for developing him since childhood, but money wasn't the only catch. They demanded a written guarantee that Yao would return to play for the national team every single summer. No rest, no off-season, just total commitment to the flag. The tension reached a breaking point just weeks before the draft. The Shanghai Sharks threatened to withhold the paperwork. Yao's mother, a former Red Guard herself, finally drew a line in the sand. She famously told officials, "If you don't reach an agreement, Yao Ming will never play basketball again. He will go to university, and that will be the end." It was a bluff that shook the system. On the morning of the 2002 draft, the green light finally flickered. Yao was going to Houston, but he wasn't going as a free man. He was going as an ambassador with 1 billion observers and a debt he could never fully repay. October 2002. Yao Ming arrives in Houston. To the American public, he was a mystery wrapped in a giant's frame. The NBA had seen tall players before, but never one from a system so secretive. The reception, it was a mix of fascination and flat-out disrespect. In the Texas Heat, Yao wasn't just a rookie. He was a walking target for every skeptic in the country. The pressure was suffocating. Charles Barkley famously bet that if Yao scored more than 19 points in a single game, he would kiss his co-host's ass. In his debut, Yao played 11 minutes and scored 0 points. The media pounced. Critics called him a bust before his first week was over. Even worse, he faced a barrage of casual racism, from insensitive mock commercials to Shaquille O'Neal's now infamous taunts. For a man who spoke little English and lived with his parents in a foreign land, it felt like the experiment was failing in real time. But Yao wasn't alone in this alien world. By his side was Colin Pine, a 28-year-old American who had never played basketball and was hired as Yao's interpreter. In the early days, they were inseparable. Colin wasn't just Yao's voice, he was his cultural shield. He taught Yao American slang, how to order food, and how to navigate the locker room banter. Yao, who was used to the cold military silence of Chinese gyms, was suddenly surrounded by the loud, brash ego of the NBA. Through Colin, Yao began to show a side the state plan never intended, a dry, razor-sharp wit. He wasn't just a giant, he was becoming one of the guys. Then came the ultimate test of character. Shaquille O'Neal, the undisputed diesel of the NBA, began mocking Yao's heritage in interviews, using a fake accent that many condemned as racist. The American media waited for an explosion. They expected a clash of titans. But Yao, reflecting the poise of a man who had been under a microscope his entire life, chose a different path. He simply said, "Basketball is a global language. I'm sure Shaq is just joking. I want to meet him." By refusing to be a victim, Yao became something much more powerful. He became a leader. This was the moment the experiment evolved. China had built Yao to dominate, but Yao chose to connect. He took the Great Wall and turned it into a welcome mat. For the American audience, this was the click moment. He wasn't a threat from the East anymore. He was Houston's favorite son. And back in China, this transformation was worth more than any gold medal. He was proving that a Chinese citizen could be the most liked person in the American heartland. The laboratory in Shanghai had built one thing perfectly: Yao's discipline. In November, Yao finally exploded, scoring 20 points on a perfect 9-for-9 shooting night. Barkley had to kiss a donkey on national television, but the real turning point came when he faced the undisputed king of the league, Shaq. Everyone expected Shaq to bully the gentle giant. Instead, when they finally met, Yao blocked Shaq's first 3 shots. He showed the world that he wasn't just tall, he was talented. And this is when he won Shaq's heart. Shaq would later admit that Yao was one of the only players he ever truly respected. He had the touch of a guard and the footwork of a master. The Great Wall had officially been built in the heart of Texas. Suddenly, Yao Mania was a global phenomenon. He wasn't just a player, he was a corporate corporate gold mine. Every time Yao stepped on the floor, he was a bridge. On one side of the Pacific, millions of Chinese fans were waking up at 4 a.m. to watch a Rockets game. On the other, American brands were salivating over 1 billion new customers. Yao Ming had successfully linked the two largest economies on Earth through an orange leather ball. But while the world was celebrating, Yao's body was beginning to send out its first warning signs. The cost of being a bridge is that eventually everyone walks all over you. Biology has its limits, even for a giant. At 7 feet 6 and nearly 310 pounds, Yao Ming was a masterpiece of human engineering, but he was also a structural nightmare. Every step he took on a basketball court exerted thousands of pounds of pressure on his bones. In a normal world, a player of his size would be managed with extreme care. He would have summers off to rest, heal, and recover, but Yao Ming didn't live in a normal world. This is where the state plan turned from a gift into a curse. Because the Chinese government had funded his development, they felt they owned his time. All of it. While his NBA rivals were vacationing in the off-season, Yao was forced to fly across the globe to play in every FIBA tournament, every Asian game, and every Olympic qualifier. He was the only superstar in history who played professional basketball 12 months a year for nearly a decade. His body was a machine that was never allowed to turn off. By 2005, the cracks began to show. Literally, stress fractures in his feet, osteomyelitis in his toe, broken bones in his knee. Between 2005 and 2011, Yao missed over 250 games. The tragedy was that when he was on the floor, he was peaking. He was averaging 25 points and 10 rebounds, dominant enough to make the Rockets a legitimate title contender alongside superstar Tracy McGrady. But the what if of the Yao McGrady era remains one of the saddest chapters in NBA history. Two legends, both broken by the very physical gifts that made them great. The final blow came during the 2009 playoffs. In a heroic stand against Kobe Bryant's Lakers, Yao's foot gave out for the last time. He tried to fight it. He underwent complex surgeries to rearrange the bones in his feet, a desperate attempt to extend a career that the world wasn't ready to see end. But the damage was done. The experiment had pushed the subject too far. In July 2011, at just 30 years old, the age when most centers are in their prime, the Great Wall finally collapsed. Yao Ming announced his retirement, leaving the game not because he wanted to, but because he simply couldn't walk anymore. So what is the final verdict on the Yao Ming experiment? If you look at the numbers, it was a staggering success. Yao wasn't just a player, he was a phenomenon. He was an 8-time All-Star, a 5-time All-NBA selection, and the single most important ambassador the game has ever seen. He didn't just play in the NBA, he expanded its borders, bringing basketball to 1 billion people and changing the league's economy forever. He proved that a giant from a closed system could become a beloved icon in the capital of capitalism. But if you look at the human cost, the answer is more complex. Yao Ming was a man who was never given a choice. From the arranged union of his parents to the grueling drills of his youth, his life was a blueprint designed by others. He sacrificed his childhood, his physical health, and his long-term mobility for the sake of national prestige. The body that was engineered to be a weapon eventually became a cage. Yet, in a strange twist of fate, Yao found his own voice within that cage. He used his platform to become a leader, a businessman, and a protector of the environment, finally pursuing interests that had nothing to do with a basketball. Yao Ming's story is a reminder that you can manufacture an athlete, but you cannot manufacture a soul. He carried the weight of a nation on a fractured frame, and he did it with a grace and humor that no state program could have taught him. He was a giant, not just because of his height, but because of the character he maintained while living under a microscope. In the end, the experiment produced exactly what it wanted, a legend. But Yao Ming's true victory was becoming a man who was finally, for the first time in his life, free to stand on his own 2 feet. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more stories about the hidden side of sports history, subscribe to the channel. We'll see you in the next one.